Welcome to Love Lies Chronicles.
I'd really appreciate your comment. It helps me understand if you enjoyed the story and how I can improve in future ones. She pitched it like a wellness challenge, not a marriage decision. Sunday evening, snow drifting sideways past the kitchen window, her elbows on the island like a coach drawing plays on a napkin. I watched the steam from her tea curl around her face and dissolve, the only movement in a room that felt suddenly airless. My name is Daniel Cole, 38, a financial analyst in Denver, Colorado. I was halfway through prepping lunches for the week when I realized she had arrived at a conclusion long before inviting me into it. A sticky note rested under her mug, 7 days. No touching, no affection, no intimacy, nothing between us. The handwriting was neat, underlined twice. She pushed it toward me with 2 fingers, like a contract sliding across a table. The phrasing wasn't accidental. No touching was obvious, but nothing between us held something colder. Not just bodies, but warmth, softness, anything that let us be a team instead of 2 residents. I put the lid on a glass container, clicked it shut. The quiet gave me just enough space to watch her expression, that slight lifted corner of her mouth I'd started seeing in the last few months. The look of someone who expects an argument and is already rehearsing her best lines. She called it a relationship reset. I heard trial separation without paperwork. She mentioned staying at Tasha's for the week. Close enough for work, far enough to feel symbolic. A suitcase waited by the door like an exclamation point. The details were carefully arranged to sound reasonable. A week. Time to think. Space to remove pressure. The impression of a controlled experiment. But experiments don't begin on day 1. They begin weeks earlier when someone starts collecting variables. I'd seen those variables. The phone that never faced up anymore. The new lock screen. The late workouts that produced no sweat on her clothes. The way she kept a jacket on at home like she might be leaving again in 10 minutes. You start to notice when you work with spreadsheets for a living. Patterns show up even in tone of voice. I asked how she wanted it to work. No accusation, just logistics. She ticked off rules as if reading from a prepared list. No kisses. No lingering hugs. No accidental brushes past each other in the hallway. No heavy talks either. My coffee sat cooling beside the sink while she outlined a test designed to make me fail by trying to pass. She kept watching for a crack in my composure, the first flicker of protest, the apology for needs I hadn't expressed. I nodded. Fighting the framing would make it her story. Accepting it turned the lights on. I told her I'd drop some clothes in the guest room and keep the house schedule normal. She hesitated at that, like routine threatened the drama. The suitcase handle clicked, plastic on plastic. She waited in the doorway, expecting me to follow, to ask where exactly, with whom, for how long. I didn't. I tightened the lid on another container. The kitchen was clean, the counters clear, the week lined up in rows of lunches. Peaceful. That word rose up in me like a buoy. There was an old irony running through the moment. I'd just renewed my gym membership that morning, a 3-month plan I'd kept debating. Not a New Year's resolution. The guy at the desk had asked if I wanted a free session with a trainer. I almost said yes. Instead, I asked for a sunset hour slot 3 days a week, quiet signs of a new rhythm. She thanked me for being understanding without looking up from her screen. A rideshare pinged. I saw the notification reflected in the oven door. Her account was still tied to mine from before we simplified the subscriptions. The route arced across the map to Tasha's building. For a second, I remembered the first year in this house. The weekend we assembled that oven together, both of us laughing at a wrong screw that refused to back out. The memory was solid, the present, thin as paper. By the time the driver arrived, her tone had cooled into rehearsed lightness. The suitcase rolled across the wood like a long exhale. At the threshold she paused, waiting for a speech she could push against. There wasn't one. I held the door. A rush of cold. Her perfume folded into the winter air and disappeared. The latch clicked shut the way it always had, but I heard something separate in it. A finality located in the simplest sound. I wiped the counter because habit makes good ballast. Then I walked through the house and looked at it as if I were cataloging a property for evidence of wear. The ring dish on the dresser with nothing in it. The folded blankets at the end of the couch. The plant by the window reaching toward a light it can't name. Everything where we left it. Yet the room felt as if someone had subtracted oxygen. That's the part people misunderstand about withdrawal. I went to the guest room and set a small stack of clothes on the chair. I moved my phone charger to the other outlet and put a book on the nightstand. That was enough. I don't live for grand gestures. I choose dials over switches. 5 minutes later, the house looked almost exactly the same. Almost. It hit me then that I wasn't bracing for a long time. I was measuring day 1. The only thing real was how I carried the next 12 hours. That clarity removed the last of the static. A man who knows his footing doesn't chase echo. She texted as the car turned onto the main road. Feels weird already. I stared at the screen, then set it face down. The guest room was quiet enough to hear the heater dull and steady through the wall. The habits came easy. I threw a load of laundry into the machine and listened to the drum catch and settle. I opened the mail, recycled what didn't matter, filed what did. That last part had started weeks ago, a slow little project no one noticed. Insurance policies in a labeled folder, copies of keys wrapped in tape, a scan of the deed in cloud storage under a name only I would guess. Another text arrived with a photo of a couch at Tasha's place. The angle made it look like something out of a catalog. Think this is good for the reset. She wanted space from affection. I gave her space from attention. That's not revenge. It's symmetry. I made dinner for one and took it at the counter rather than the table, a small change that didn't ask the room to lie. After, I set 2 plates on the rack anyway. One for me, one for the version of us that met on purpose at a table. Respect isn't erased by someone else's experiment. It just refuses to perform. On the way to the guest room, I passed the mirror in the hall and stopped. The man in it looked steady, not wounded, just done with the idea that closeness can be negotiated by starvation. I flicked off the light and the house settled around me, familiar and neutral. Day 1 had started with her rules. It ended with my posture. If the test was to learn what existed between us when we removed touch, then she'd discover something quick and simple. I remain exactly who I am when nothing is handed to me. That was always the point I think I had missed. I slid under a different blanket in a different bed in the same house and listened to the heater click again. My phone stayed dark on the dresser. The silence wasn't a punishment anymore. It was a boundary. By the end of day 1, she was already texting the void. The morning after that one-word answer, the house pretended to be normal. Coffee, shower, emails. She moved around me in a cheerful loop. Music on her phone, makeup at the kitchen sink, a quick selfie by the sliding door. By noon, my bank app pinged twice. Boutique, brunch. The numbers weren't catastrophic. It was the message inside them that mattered. I put my phone face down next to a set of drawings and finished a vendor call like nothing else was happening. At lunch, I sat in my truck outside the site and logged into the HR portal. 5 clicks and a 2-factor code later, my direct deposit was split. The bulk into a new checking account in my name only, a small fixed amount into the joint account to float whatever was already queued this week. Not a punishment. A correction. The same move I'd make if a subcontractor started billing outside scope. Tie the spin to its own line. Stop letting it leak everywhere. I opened a second high-yield savings under the same bank login and set 2 recurring transfers. Emergency fund on the 5th, taxes on the 15th. The automations made a faint satisfaction bell go off in my chest. In construction, you learn that a good process is louder than an argument. When I got home that night, a stack of packages sat against the credenza. Perfume. A box with a tiny envelope and a ribbon. Something from a spa with its name printed in gold across the tape. I cut open the mail, sorted bills from junk, and left the boxes where she'd know to find them. She breezed in with a smile bigger than the day, angled one package toward the light, and said, "Finally." I nodded, the way I'd nod to a crane operator who just finished a tricky lift. The next day, she worked from home. I caught pieces of a call while I measured the guest room for a shelving project I'd been putting off. "He gets weird about money," she told someone on speaker. Voice turned light in that way people use to float a hard thing. Like, I can't even buy a dress without an audit. I paused with the tape against the wall and let the length settle, 84 inches. When the call ended, she walked in and kissed me on the cheek like there had been no content under the tone. "You measuring something?" she asked. "Shelves," I said. She smiled and drifted away. I spent the evening in small maintenance moves. I removed her as an authorized user on my personal card, the one I use for tools and travel. I rotated the passwords on anything that stores payment info. Airline, home improvement sites, the place I buy work boots. I enabled alerts on every joint transaction over $20. Not to pounce, to see. Seeing is 90% of control, but it's the quiet kind, the kind that keeps bridges standing after the ribbon cutting. Wednesday, I corrected our autopays. Up to now, the joint card handled too many things out of laziness. A streaming platform, a couple of subscriptions, odds and ends that blossomed into real money when added across a year. I moved the essentials, insurance, utilities, my phone, to my new checking and put calendar reminders beside each due date. I let the rest remain where they naturally wanted to live, on her side of the ledger. She'd called questions control. Fine. I would give the questionless version of that life. Free of interruptions. Pure feedback. That evening, she floated the question without actually asking. We should plan a weekend away, she said, scrolling through photos of friends in ski towns and desert spas. All our friends are doing something. I wiped down the stovetop and said what was true. We can plan, but we should look at our cash flow. She made a face like I'd put a drop of vinegar in her wine. You always have to make it about money. I let the silence answer for me. It traveled the length of the kitchen and settled into the living room like it had paid rent. Thursday was deliveries again, and a lunch with someone from the new friend group. I know because a charge hit from a place that posts every plate to social media. When she came home, she set a bag from the boutique on the counter and said, "Return window is only 7 days, so remind me to try these tonight." I nodded and made pasta. We ate in near peace until she picked up her phone, shot off a text, and laughed. Mara says I should set up a fun budget that's off limits to your commentary. I twirled a forkful and said, "Set up whatever budget you want. Just don't run it through mine." She looked at me like I'd spoken an unfamiliar language and went back to her phone. I finished the shelves Friday morning before work and cleaned up the sawdust. The house looked better for the effort, the way anything does when you bother to finish what you start. While I showered, a new alert. Cosmetics subscription upgrade. Another. Same spa as before, different service. I let them stack. The point of a baseline is to show you slope. If you cut too early, you can convince yourself it was an anomaly. At lunch, I swung by the bank branch to remove an old overdraft protection link from the joint account. The teller handed me a form. I initialed the boxes, signed my name, and felt a piece of air return to my lungs. I asked for a printed list of recurring charges the bank could see. It was educational. I thanked the teller and put the printout in my glove compartment next to a pair of work gloves and a flashlight. Tools are tools, paper or otherwise. That evening we crossed each other at the door, me coming in with groceries, her heading out with a clutch and a hair that took time. She glanced into the bags. "We're out of oat milk." "This is what I'm using," I said. She made a small noise and kissed off a cloud of perfume. "Don't wait up." On the couch, I moved my own small comforts off the joint card without ceremony. Coffee subscription, new card. News app, new card. Cloud storage, new card. None of it dramatic, but each click felt like snapping a chalk line. Straight, bright, undeniable. I archived the confirmation emails in a folder called Standing. The name made me smile because it worked in both directions. Around 9, she texted a photo of a dessert I've never liked and 2 champagne flutes. "Be fun," the caption read. I sent back a thumbs up and went back to the maintenance log for a pedestrian bridge we'd turned over last year. There's a method I teach junior PMs: define, isolate, correct, verify. It applies to steel, water, and marriage. Saturday, we circled each other again. She slept late, ordered smoothies, and walked around in a new robe. I fixed a loose hinge and replaced the batteries in 2 smoke detectors that had been complaining for a month. In the afternoon, she said, "We should put everything on autopay so we stop having these stress talks." I nodded. Agreed. I've moved mine. You can move yours. Her mouth opened, then closed. The robe swished. She went upstairs. By the time Sunday came, the pattern was fully visible. The joint card was a stream with one source. My life, work, bills, groceries, gas, was quietly routed elsewhere. Nothing had exploded. I hadn't delivered a speech or held up a spreadsheet in the middle of a fight. I had just stopped subsidizing noise. That night, I stood at the counter with the same spreadsheet and watched the week assemble itself into lines and totals. She walked by and said, "What now?" without stopping. "Nothing," I said, and meant it. I wasn't policing anything. I was observing and adjusting, The way I do when a project starts drifting a degree off course. By the end of the week, I wasn't spending $1 from our shared account. Every time the bank app pinged, I let it. The first hour after she left felt like a hell breath I finally released. I stacked the cutting board, rinsed the knife, and watched the water ribbon down the steel like a metronome. The house took on that steady hum you only notice when no one's performing for anyone. Heater clicking, fridge settling. The faint whir of the bathroom fan we always forget to turn off. My phone buzzed on the counter. Feels weird already. I let the screen dim. A minute later, another. You okay? I typed 2 words and stopped at the period, respecting boundaries. Send. Nothing more. If this was a test about craving, I wasn't going to cheat by supplying the answers she wanted. I opened my laptop and started with the small switches. Streaming profiles. I removed hers as an authorized viewer under my email. Same with the rideshare account we'd never fully untangled. Her card on her phone, but the account tied to mine. That was a line I should have drawn months ago. 2-factor authentication across everything I paid for personally. Another buzz. Netflix broke. Did you change something? I set the phone face down. The stainless steel kettle reflected a clean little circle of light on the stove. Quiet gives you room to see what you should have seen earlier. Next, the bank. I wasn't rushing money out of anywhere. I'm not reckless. But there's nothing unlawful about moving my direct deposit to a solo checking I'd opened last quarter and never used. Bills on the joint account kept their auto-pay. Groceries, utilities, mortgage, untouched. I just shut off the spigot that fed impulse. One call to the credit card company to remove an authorized user on a personal card. One email to the bank to enable transaction alerts on the joint so nothing could surprise me at 2 in the morning. Boring moves. Strong moves. The phone vibrated across the counter. Seriously? You're really fine with this? I measured out coffee for tomorrow instead of answering. I set the grinder for a coarse morning brew, lid clicking, the kitchen returning to its slow rhythm. By the time I wiped the counter, a third message. Are you mad at me? No, not mad. Past that. I showered, dressed down, and stretched on the living room floor. 10 minutes of motion to file the day away from my body. On the ceiling above the couch, tiny hairline cracks zigzagged in the paint like a topographical map. Flaws you live under forever until one day you finally trace them with your eyes. That was us. Lines that were always there, now visible because I stared long enough. Another ping, then 3 in a row. Why aren't you responding? So you don't care? This is not what I meant. I set the phone to do not disturb for a single contact, not as a snub, but as a guardrail. She'd written the rule. No heavy talks this week. I took her seriously. Funny how boundaries look like stone walls only when they lock you out. At 10, my email chimed. A security alert on the shopping account she likes, a login attempt from a different IP. I declined the push, changed the password, and deleted saved addresses tied to my cards. If she wanted separation, I'd build the fence where our money and time always mixed into arguments later. 11 brought a photo of Tasha's couch, the cushions pretending to be comfortable, a glass of wine on the table angled just so. The caption read, "Find your peace, right?" I let it pass. The room around me had already chosen mine. At 11:30, she called. I watched the name glow and disappear. A text followed immediately. "Pick up. This is childish." I poured water, took 2 long drinks, and turned the lights off one by one. The house darkened without drama, a stage after the audience leaves. Somewhere a neighbor's dog barked twice and stopped. I slept like a man who doesn't owe anyone his pulse. Morning arrived cold and blue. The guest room window framed a thin strip of sky turning from slate to gold. I dressed for the gym and paused in the hall, listening. On the way out, I moved a stack of envelopes to the desk, sorted, shredded the credit card offers I never asked for. One I kept, discount at the car wash I actually use. I smiled at the ordinary sense of it. Then I drove east, the sun rising over snow-smudged roofs, and put 40 minutes into my lungs and legs. When I came back, the phone showed 13 unread messages. They stacked from flirty to edgy to uncertain, a gradient in timestamps. You're up early. We're not seeing you. Are you ignoring me? I didn't plan it like this. Can we set some rules? This is making me anxious. Why are you being cold? Daniel? I made eggs and coffee and ate standing at the counter. I answered one message, careful like a man using a scalpel. You asked for a week with nothing between us. I'm honoring it. I won't debate it by text. I put the phone back down. She read it and started typing. The dots appeared, vanished, reappeared. Nothing came through for a full minute. Then, I thought you'd fight me on it. There it was, the assumption built into her experiment. The audition she'd expected me to fail by pleading for the part. I finished my coffee and rinsed the cup. Throughout the morning, I repotted a plant that had been leaning since August, returned 2 shirts I never wore, and sent a single, unemotional email to HR redirecting my paycheck. At 11, the joint account pinged, a small rideshare charge to Tasha Street. Confirmation that she was where she said she'd be. Noon brought the first guilt volley. You don't even miss me, do you? I didn't take the bait. Missing has nothing to do with boundaries. You can miss someone and still refuse the terms that hurt you. By early afternoon, she pivoted to performance. Going out later, girls' night. Should be fun. A photo followed. Lipstick, a sweater I recognized. The angle tilted to make the mirror look taller. The kind of picture sent to collect a response. I let it age without one. I opened my budgeting app instead and created a category I'd avoided naming, legal/consultation, and put a placeholder number there. Not a threat. A reminder to myself that clarity costs something and I was willing to pay. The heater kicked on. Sun slid across the living room rug. Warming a band I moved my chair into. I read 20 pages of the book I'd left by the guest bed last night, the author underlining a sentence that landed like a hand on the shoulder. The opposite of desperation is not indifference. It's decision. I closed the cover and felt the sentence settle. Late afternoon, a new message. This isn't what I wanted. Can we talk? Like actually talk? I typed and deleted, then wrote the only honest line that didn't let the conversation balloon into an argument we'd already had. We're 18 hours into your plan. 3 dots. Nothing. At 5, I cooked again, steak this time, pan smoking, the smell cutting through the winter flatness outside. I set a plate for 1 and ate slow, rinsed, dried, put the skillet back. 7 brought the crack I'd expected but hadn't hunted for. I don't like this. I feel shut out. I leaned on the counter and let the sentence breathe. She wanted me to collapse the distance she built, to rescue her from lonely with the same hands she kept slapping away. I won't be a villain or a savior. I will be a boundary. I sent a practical note, the only one I was willing to send that night. If you need to stop by for anything, text first. I'll leave the porch light on. The message boomeranged the rules back to the front door where they belonged. 10 minutes later. Okay. The night's last hour stretched long and plain. I put on a podcast about markets, not relationships, and let someone else think out loud while I folded laundry. When the phone finally stilled on the nightstand, I felt what I hadn't allowed myself to feel in months, unhooked. By the end of day 1, she was fraying at the edges of the experiment she designed. I wasn't. I had work to do, miles to run, eggs to fry, bills to pay, peace to keep. Pressure isn't always shouting. Sometimes it's a man who refuses the script you handed him and reads his own in a steady voice you can't misinterpret. By the time the house went quiet that first night, I'd already decided I wasn't walking this back. She wanted 7 days, without anything between us. Fine. I wrote it down like a contract and treated it like one. No intimacy, obviously, but also no shared benefits. If she wanted clean separation to test whether she still felt anything, she was going to feel the full weight of life without me. I wasn't angry. I was precise. I moved into the guest room without a sound. I carried my documents to the safe, closed it, and put the key on my new nightstand. Morning made things simple. I brewed 1 cup of coffee, not 2. I left her card on the counter with a sticky note. Your week, your expenses. By 9, my inbox was cleared, a short list of calls scheduled, and a PDF taped to the fridge labeled 7-day protocol. 10 lines. Clear, neutral. Separate bedrooms. Separate meals. If asked, we tell the truth. We're taking a week apart under the same roof because she requested it. Logistics only by text. On day 7 at 7 p.m., we decide, recommit or separate. I added a line at the bottom. No one gets to pretend they weren't warned. Her first test came fast. A text from the bedroom. This is getting weird. Let's just act normal. I read it twice and let the space between us do its work. I replied with a screenshot of the document and a single line. We're acting exactly according to your request. 10 minutes later, another message landed, softer this time. I didn't mean money or coffee or everything. That was the moment I knew the mirror was working. I wasn't withholding love. I was withholding the glue I'd been pouring into every crack. Quiet changes the balance of a house. By lunch, I'd called the bank and changed the joint checking to require 2 signatures for withdrawals over a modest amount. Not a trap, protection, and entirely reasonable under a trial separation. I updated the car insurance to reflect separate drivers for separate vehicles. I put her spare key on the hook by the door. If she needed my car, she could ask like an adult and offer a swap. In the past, I'd just handed things over and swallowed the irritation later. Not this week. Midday, I forwarded the protocol to 2 people who mattered, my older brother and her father. No color commentary, just the facts. We're taking a week apart at her request. I'll keep you updated at the end of the week. In our marriage, I'd done too much quiet damage control, softening her stories to her family so she'd look better and we'd look fine. Not anymore. By afternoon, she started poking holes in her own plan. First came, maybe 7 is too long. Then came, we can still share dinner. Then, I didn't mean we should be cold. I was friendly, steady, and uninterested in renegotiating day 2. I answered only logistics, scheduled my meals around my life, and left the house when I needed air. I added one final piece to the week, a written list of terms for a full return. Counseling booked by both of us, not just me. Password transparency for 3 months. A clean split of chores, tracked on the whiteboard we never used. Financial clarity, including her discretionary spending spelled out and capped until we re-established trust. A commitment to intimacy that wasn't a bargaining chip. And yes, consequences. If nothing changed by day 7, I'd move forward with a formal separation. I printed 2 copies and slid one under her door. No commentary attached. The revenge, if you want to call it that, wasn't a stunt. It was removal of the safety rails she'd leaned on while kicking at them. For years, I'd played shock absorber for her abrupt pivots, her experiments. I'd turned every "I need space" into a puzzle I could solve with extra effort. Mirror logic was the opposite. It was effort turned inward. The gym. The dentist appointment I kept delaying. The side project I'd shelved. That night, walking back from the gym, I saw the light on in the guest room window and felt nothing sharp, nothing vengeful. Just distance that had finally earned its name. Inside, the house smelled like the candle she always lit when she wanted to signal peace without the work. She was at the table with our wedding album open like a prop. I didn't bite. I set my keys where they belong, filled my water, and said I'd be in the office for an hour. Before bed, I set a timer on my phone. 6 days, 20 hours, and change. The countdown didn't feel like doom. It felt like clarity with a clock on it. 7 days, without anything between us, had revealed the truth by the end of day 1. She missed the buffer, not the man. My job now was to keep that buffer away long enough for both of us to see what remained. If it was love, it would stand without scaffolding. If it wasn't, then ending it cleanly was mercy disguised as steel. I slept again. The mirror was steady, and I didn't flinch when it reflected both of us exactly as we were. The house felt cleaner when silence did the talking. Day 1 ended with me in the guest room, my phone on Do Not Disturb, my calendar blocked for the week. I slept hard. She didn't. She tried cheerful first. Coffee. I poured my own, nodded once, and let the quiet swallow the performance. She'd wanted 7 days with nothing between us. By 9, her first text landed, sent from 3 rooms away like we were coworkers. Can we talk? I answered the way I would in any professional setting, after my 10 a.m. stand-up. We can schedule something this afternoon if it's about logistics. She left it on read, then tried the kitchen ambush, hands soft on my forearm, a breath against my neck, a gentle laugh about how last night got dramatic. I eased my arm free, not unkind, and asked if this was logistics. She blinked like she'd walked into the wrong meeting. At 10:17, the salon called to confirm a color appointment on our joint card. I told them to move it to her personal file or cancel. 10 minutes later, the house thundered. So you're cutting me off now? Not anger in my body, just steadiness. You asked for 7 days without anything between us. That includes me carrying expenses while you evaluate whether I deserve to exist in your life. She did have a new accusation, controlling, punitive, cruel. Words she'd borrowed from podcasts. I let them drift past. If you think I'm cruel, I said quietly, you'll be relieved to keep your distance. By lunch, The group chat she lives inside started text buzzing our walls. The volume of her sighs told the story. She tried the concerned friend chorus. Apparently I'd snapped, overreacted, and was using money to punish. When one of them pushed to FaceTime me directly, I called her mother instead. Calmly, I outlined what actually happened. Her proposal, my mirror, the one-day collapse. 10 minutes later my wife burst in with, "Did you call my mother?" I looked at my calendar and said, "Yes. Neutral parties deserve facts." She pivoted to the trip she'd been building toward for weeks, a quick reset out of town. That was the plan behind her 7-day experiment. She'd take a flight, clear her head, and come back to a man warm on the back burner. She opened the airline app and turned chalk white. I'd moved our travel points to my account before bed, not to spite her, to end the era where my resources escorted her to indecision. "I'll book with cash," she snapped, but the card declined. She tried another. Same result. She texted a name I'd seen too often on her home screen lately. The typing bubbles appeared, then disappeared, then went still. Options that were glittering in theory tend to dull in daylight. At 3:04 p.m., her friend Jules DM'd me from a burner. "She's spiraling. You're scaring her." I stared at the message, then replied with 10 words. "The only thing here that's scary is the truth." It must have been screenshotted immediately, because my wife stormed in again. "Are you telling them I'm unstable?" "No. I was telling them I'm done being a prop in your storyline." By dinner time, she tried a softer edit. She cooked something she knows I like and set the table like a détente, wearing the sweater I once couldn't keep my hands off. I sat, thanked her for the plate, ate in normal proportions, and didn't perform gratitude beyond what was real. When her foot brushed mine under the table, I lifted it back onto my chair rung and asked if her new no barriers policy included rescheduling the utilities she'd been ignoring. She stared at me like I'd spoken a language she didn't learn in her circle. "This is who you are now?" she whispered. "This is who I've always been," I said. "I just stopped buffering your choices." That night, she cried loud. Doors opened, closed, opened again. I didn't chase. I set an early alarm, hit the gym before sunrise, and returned to find flowers in the kitchen, the emergency romance kit that used to reset our arguments. I moved the bouquet to the patio table and opened my laptop. My attorney's email sat on top, retainer confirmed, initial filings prepped, the household budget draft reflecting separation of expenses. Day 2 began with external consequences knocking. Her boss called my phone, number she'd only used once, to ask if I could fix a projector before a client pitch. She's requested sick leave for the week, I was told, but she posted stories last night from a bar. "Is everything okay?" I kept it brief. "We're handling a private matter. She'll communicate with HR directly." The subtext didn't need embellishment. She'd burned credibility where she'd assumed it was infinite. Her mother arrived at noon without asking. Good. I brewed coffee, handed over the spare key I'd removed from the porch lantern, and repeated my original agreement word for word. I watched a parent look at her adult child and recognized the difference between hurt and havoc. When she asked if her daughter could stay with her a few nights, I said, "That's between you two. I won't block anyone's escape route." But as they packed a bag, my wife paused in the doorway of my office and tried one last weapon, nostalgia. Old photos, our first apartment, the couch we built together with an Allen wrench and cheap beer. I smiled at the memory. "It was a good couch," I said. "We both outgrew it." The afternoon exposed the rest. Her backup sent a long message that began with, "I didn't sign up for drama," and ended with 4 apologies that meant, "I'm out." Her friends stopped sending laughing emojis and started sending long voice notes with careful tones, the kind people use when they finally realize the audience changed. Her mother texted me later, "She's here. She doesn't like your conditions." I typed back, "They're not conditions. They're consequences." By evening, she tried the last lever, intimacy as a bandage, the exact thing she'd rationed when it served her. Lingerie bag appeared on the bed like a truce flag. I picked it up and set it on her suitcase. "You want this to mean something tomorrow," I said. "Don't use it to avoid meaning something today." She said I was punishing her body for her words. I shook my head. I'm refusing to buy peace with myself on credit. The house finally quieted when her mother picked her up. On the porch, suitcase at her feet, she asked whether the 7-day clock still mattered if she wasn't under the same roof. I told her the week was her idea. Distance doesn't pause time. She swallowed whatever answer she'd hoped I'd give and took the suitcase herself. When I went back inside, there were 3 missed calls from mutual friends who wanted my version. I didn't give it. I sent one text to the group thread we share with 2 couples who've always been fair, taking space per her proposal. I'm fine. Please don't pick sides. Then I turned my phone face down, washed the single plate I'd used, and set out the paperwork for tomorrow. I was unreachable because, for the first time in a long time, I was finally within reach of myself. Her game broke because I declined to play. The week she engineered to test my worth started showing her the bill for hers. Attention isn't free, respect isn't cheap, and love isn't a subscription you cancel and restart when you're bored. By the end of day 2, everyone who needed to know did. By the end of the week, the only person left to convince would be her. And I wouldn't be doing any convincing. I woke up before the alarm and didn't check my phone. The night before had ended with her last round of messages. Apologies that read like negotiations, screenshots of half-written posts she wanted me to approve before she cleared the air, a photo of the bracelet I bought her years ago with a caption that landed like a baited hook. I put the phone face down and let the silence be the answer. That became my new morning routine. No coaching her through consequences, just black coffee and the list I'd written for myself in permanent ink. Close what I opened. Keep what I earned. Leave with what I came in with, my name, my focus, my peace. She tried the front door at 7:03, 2 soft knocks like we were still us. The lock I installed yesterday clicked and held. Please, she said through the wood, small and practiced. I waited until the hallway quieted and slid an envelope under the door. Inside, the inventory from the walkthrough I did with a neutral third party, a key tag stamped guest, a date for mediation, and a short note in my handwriting. I'm not punishing you. Boundaries are not threats. They are conditions for access. By noon, the ripple effects found me. Her friend, the bold one who had been cheerleading this experiment, left a voicemail full of careful pauses. We meant a reset, not a rupture. I deleted it. My lawyer sent over the draft separation terms. Simple, clean, the legal mirror of the emotional truth, separate accounts, separate space, clear custody schedule for the dog she only remembered when there were photos to post, and a clause I insisted on. No triangulation through friends, family, or work. If you want something from me, speak to me. If you cannot speak to me without spinning the story to an audience, you don't want resolution, you want attention. The pen felt heavier than it should have, but my signature was steady. She asked for a meeting somewhere private. I chose a glass conference room on the 12th floor, neutral ground, a table, 2 chairs, a clock you could hear. She arrived in the sweater I always liked and sat too close to the edge of the seat like proximity could make time go backward. I listened. She cried at the 5-minute mark, reached for my hand at the 7, and at 10 asked if we could pause everything for a month to rebuild the bubble. I looked at the clock and then at her fingers on the table, bare, unsteady, waiting. You asked for 7 days with nothing between us, I said, voice calm. You were right. No noise. No half-truths. And now you see what's left. She nodded like the answer hurt, and then tried to bargain with it. Therapy later, friends on probation, a controlled re-entry. My answer didn't rise or fall. Respect first or nothing. And respect isn't paperwork. It's pattern. The last push from her was noon on Friday. She asked for lunch as friends, which told me everything. Friends are for people who didn't sign commitments in front of witnesses. I sent the only reply I owed. We are not enemies. We are 2 adults honoring the end of what we could not protect. The couch where I'd slept after pointless arguments. The restaurants I kept booking out of habit to paper over distance. The cheap apologies I gave away to keep the peace. I made small rituals of ending. Deleted the draft anniversary reservations. Boxed the last photos that still made my chest tighten and labeled the box storage. Saturday morning, I moved the last bag to my new place. Nothing extravagant. Exposed brick. Afternoon light that finds the floor like a quiet dog. A kitchen that fits exactly one person who knows what he wants. I hung 2 frames. She came by once more, unannounced, standing in the hallway with a paper bag of things she said she'd found. Watch, spare chargers, a sweatshirt that still smelled like the old version of us. I thanked her and didn't invite her in. She looked past me into the room the way people do when they're measuring if there's a place for them in your new life. She held the bag a second longer like it might argue for her, and then handed it over. I'm sorry, she said. Something tight in her mouth unclenched when I didn't contradict it or make it easier. A week later, a mutual friend texted a photo from a dinner I used to attend. The chair next to her was empty. I typed and erased 3 versions of no comment, then settled on the only response I wanted to carry into the rest of my life, wishing everyone well. Then I put the phone down and checked the bolts on the bookshelf I'd mounted to the wall, another small thing done right the first time. People love to ask for tidy endings. Did she change? Did I forgive her? Did we try again? The truth is simpler and less cinematic. She moved into a smaller place across town and stopped sending messages with bait in them. I kept my mornings, my maples, my dinner table set for 1 and sometimes 2 when the company matched the standard. Respect was a practice I kept with myself. It sounds small until you realize it's everything. On the last day of the 7 she asked for, I stood on my balcony and watched the sun sit easy on the brick across the street. No scoreboards. Just the quiet relief of a man who didn't outsource his dignity again. She taught me one useful lesson. When someone asks for space to decide your value, don't hold your breath. Fill your lungs. Walk yourself out of the room. And if they ever come looking with the right words later, let your standards answer the door.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.